Hello everyone, this is Passion 9 of the Passion 9 channel. Hello there. And this is my review of Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of an Elusive Age. Joining us today is my doggy, Scruff. Say hello, Scruff. Sup, y'all? He's just gonna follow us around. No reason, he's just there. No, but anyway, Dragon Quest XI. I beat it. I beat this game. It took me like over 70-something hours to beat this game. Okay? Pretty long. Maybe slightly longer than your average JRPG. Certainly not Persona 5 long, where it's like 120 hours. But pretty goddamn long, okay? It is a long game. Alright? So if you were hoping this is JRPG that's like 20 hours, it's not. It took me a while. Started it back in January, you know, which to most of us by now probably feels like a century ago, but that's neither here nor there. Dragon Quest XI. I feel like if we're just talking about quality here, gameplay, graphics, mechanics, getting your money's worth, getting your $60, it's the full meal, the full feast, bon appetit. It's got everything, okay? It's got a shit ton of monsters, they all look exceptional, they're fun to fight, you know? It's got several diverse locations to visit, the world is huge, it's got a map that you get to fully explore in the later half of the game. Pretty standard stuff, pretty much what you want from a big epic fantasy RPG, no? Which is to say, it's quite the opposite of something like Final Fantasy 15, where, you know, it was a big, sloppy, unpolished Frankenstein's monster of a game that felt stitched together from a freaking bucket of assets Square had lying around for the last 10 years. But that's, we're not going to dwell on that. What we are going to talk about is that Dragon Quest XI is not that game. It's vastly superior. It is, however, not Persona 5. So, right off the bat, that's the best way to sum it up if we're just comparing it to other JRPGs. Much better than Final Fantasy 15. Oh, so much better than that game. Not as good as Persona 5. It sits in the middle. It has this middle ground of, you know, not being as bold and audacious as other RPGs out there. It's very conservative in its design, very conventional by design. The Dragon Quest series has a reputation for sticking to its guns, for sticking to a very classical RPG style. It is, after all, in Japan especially, considered, you know, one of the most definitive, one of the most classic old-school RPGs you can play. It is, you know, it is to JRPGs what Mario is to platformers. Let's just leave it at that, okay? And you could feel that. You could definitely feel that in Dragon Quest XI. I should note that Dragon Quest XI, personally, was my first Dragon Quest game. I had dabbled a tiny bit in Dragon Quest VIII when it came out on the PS2 back in 2004, a long time ago. And I remember it being charming to look at. It has that Toriyama style, that classic, you know, Dragon Ball look. But I could not get past the excessive random battles, which fortunately this game doesn't have. You know, it's definitely, that's one thing that Dragon Quest XI has done to get with the times. There are no random battles. In fact, if you look over here, you can see that there are monsters just roaming about the land. And you can just run up to them at your leisure, at your own pace, and fight whichever ones you please. Which is great, because there are no jarring interruptions during gameplay where you're just pulled into battle. And boy, does that go a long way for me. It certainly did for Persona 5 as well. I feel like that should always be the standard now for modern-day JRPGs. And more often than not, it is. I honestly can't remember the last time a modern JRPG had random battles. So I think that's a thing of the past. So much so that even Dragon Quest XI has kicked it to the curb. And rightfully so. It breaks up the flow, interferes with gameplay pacing, and is not fun. So that's a big plus for me with Dragon Quest XI. Finally allowed me to get on board with the series. This is also the first Dragon Quest game to be on consoles since Dragon Quest VIII. The last two were actually handheld exclusives. So in many ways, it's both a return to form for Dragon Quest and maybe a few very hesitant step forwards into the future, you know, for a series that had always been kind of slow to catch up with other role-playing norms. And make no mistake, outside of the removal of random encounters, this is still a pretty standard, very old-fashioned game. You know, you go from kingdom to kingdom, town to town, village to village, you solve people's problems, you uncover more of a bigger plot, which I'll admit takes a very long time to get underway, and even when it does, there's not much to it. It's pretty simplistic. The main villain even isn't revealed until several hours into the game, and by the time he is, his role in the game is, well, just to be the looming bad guy, essentially, and you really don't get much more out of it than that. So it's pretty standard, predictable fare on a narrative level, and to be fair, I just said fair twice, in different ways. It's not trying to revolutionize the genre. It's certainly not trying to wow you or blow you away with its narrative. What I will say, though, what kept me glued to the screen with Dragon Quest XI, what kept me playing and enjoying the heck out of it anyway, is that aside from looking absolutely gorgeous, the environments are beautiful, it's running on the Unreal Engine 4, so everything looks pristine, runs at a nice, consistent frame rate, and, you know, again, it's got that Toriyama style, so everything's bursting with charm. It has some of the best monster designs I've ever seen in this type of game before. And it's, honestly, it gets by a lot on that charm. It gets a lot of mileage out of that stuff. Another thing I would probably criticize, though, is that the main cast of characters are not that great. I mean, they're not unlikable, but they're not the most memorable cast characters. Your main protagonist in particular, as is the case with all Dragon Quest games, is a silent protagonist. He doesn't talk or speak like the other characters. He's kind of there as a stand-in for the player. I'm not super hooked on his design. Out of all the Dragon Quest character designs, this is probably my least favorite. He just looks so boring. He's not even given much fun expressions to work with. He just kind of looks glum all the time, and I don't know, he's just kind of flat and boring. I don't like his outfit. I don't like his haircut or whatever. You know, if you're gonna give me a silent protagonist to project myself onto, give me something a little more to work with. You know, a character with maybe more expression, more swagger. Again, I hate to keep comparing it to Persona 5, but you think about the characters in that game, especially a Joker, you know, who... He may not be a fully voiced character either, but he's given just enough, like, personality in his expressions and in his character design that I don't know, it's better overall. So yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with the main character's design, but the rest of the cast has obviously more to work with. This is also the first Dragon Quest game to have voice acting, and it's okay. I found it mediocre for the most part, sometimes a little cringe here and there, but it's passable, it's serviceable. There are no standout performances, I feel. It's all very typical, you know, it sounds about as decent as any, like, run-of-the-mill anime dub you've ever heard. So, unfortunately, there is no Japanese track. In Japan, the game is traditionally voiceless. You just read the text. And I found that switching over to that was a much better fit for the old-school style the game was conveying. So, that would be my recommendation. You know, mileage will vary. Maybe you'll find the voice acting to be better than I did, but I was not impressed at all. So, what else do we got here? The characters are okay. Like, this thief guy I'm fighting alongside right now, I didn't really give a crap about him until several hours into the game, when he's given a little more backstory to work with. I do like the sisters, Veronica and Serena, that you encounter later, the two magic users. They have a very emotional and what am I saying? Heartstring pulling arc later in the game that I found very, very amusing. It also leads to one of the better twists later in the game. Just when you think the story is maybe too lighthearted, maybe too safe, we do get something with those sisters that I thought was a good punch to the gut, but I won't say any more about that. The difficulty, I heard, was a point of contention for some. It's not a particularly hard game. In fact, most of it's pretty easy. As you can see already, like, the combat is not super challenging. There are a couple of tough bosses later in the game, but it never gets overwhelming for me. For anybody who's played a lot of JRPGs, it doesn't really get that overwhelming. And the first several hours are very laid back and very easygoing. And in fact, if I were to recommend Dragon Quest XI, I think the biggest recommendation I could give is that outside of stuff like Persona 5 or Final Fantasy, it's probably the most chill, laid-back JRPG you could play, the most easygoing, like fluidly paced. You could just play it at your own way. You know, there is a higher difficulty setting that you can access from the start of the game, but once it's set, you can't switch over, so you gotta commit to it. And I personally found the standard difficulty to be actually well suited to this game, because it does feel like something more mellow, you know what I mean, than the fast-paced, super strategic battles of like your Personas or Final Fantasy. And the leveling system is fun, you know. I wasn't super into the weapon crafting mechanic, even though it is actually pretty unique and well done. You can just buy and upgrade weapons the same way you would in any RPG if you prefer. That's certainly an option, and you can ignore the weapon crafting altogether, but it's a neat addition. So, yeah, I guess overall I really did enjoy Dragon Quest XI. It's not a particularly surprising game, but there's just enough charm, there's just enough rug pulls later on with the game's direction and pacing, you know, that it doesn't overstay its welcome, even though it's still a very long game. By the time I got to its final credits, it felt, well, I say final credits, there is a huge post-game, apparently, when you finish the main story, but I have not checked that out yet, and if it's something worth covering, maybe I'll mention it. But you're definitely getting a crap ton of content. I do wish there was more music in the game. I've heard some people say that the soundtrack is way too old school, it's way too retro. You do get a full orchestral score, as well as several other additions in the Switch version, which I know comes with the option for Japanese voice acting, a mechanic that lets you play the entire game like you're playing it on Super Nintendo. Apparently the Switch version is the definitive version to get. You do get a slight graphical downgrade, though, so you'll have to pick your pros and cons there. But it does sound like the Switch version has more to offer in terms of features. But I've only played the PS4 version, so I can only go by that. And again, I didn't mind the retro music. I didn't mind the old sound design. I think it does add to the game's old school charm. I do wish there was more of it, though, because the music that's there is not exactly the most memorable stuff to begin with. It's not as memorable as the awesome jazz stuff in Persona 5, or even as iconic as something like, Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger. You're not going to get those kinds of melodies in this game, and that's kind of unfortunate. I do wish the soundtrack had a little more work put into it, even if they were going with that old MIDI sound design. There's not a lot of it. It tends to repeat quite a bit. Some kingdoms and locations you visit will have the same music, kind of repeated in a cookie-cutter fashion, and that's unfortunate. The locations themselves, though, are super varied. The monsters are super varied. So there's always new stuff to discover. It's just you will be listening to a lot of the same music throughout the game, and that's a bit of a bummer, because a game like this probably would have gotten a lot more mileage out of having more musical variety. So, I mean, that's definitely something I'd say takes a few points down on the whole thing. But putting all that aside, Dragon Quest XI is a pretty solid game. It's a pretty great one. I especially recommend it to people who are new to JRPGs and maybe haven't played many themselves. It's very easy and accessible, very easygoing to understand, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So, yeah, that's my Dragon Quest XI review. Hit the subscribe button if you think it was a good one. If you like what I do, and you like the little doggy that's following me around in this game right now, maybe somehow I could put him in other videos. Probably not, because that's impossible. But that's really all I got to say. It's good. It's a good game. Go play it, alright? It's the chill game. It's the chill JRPG of 2020. And don't we all need some chill right now? Chill with Dragon Quest XI. Passion 9. Live for the passion. See you guys next time.